Welcome to Anews. I'm Jamila Nasser, and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. Turkey continues to play a crucial role in sustaining the fragile U.S.-sponsored ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, engaging in intensive diplomatic efforts to prevent a renewed outbreak of violence and to promote lasting regional stability. Anews editor Mustafa Kocakenar and Dr. Nurhan Elbaya, professor of strategic studies at Istanbul Aydın University and consultant for the United Nations Development Program, will explore this critical issue in depth.
As tensions continue to shape the Middle East, Türkiye has intensified its diplomatic engagements with Gulf nations to promote stability, security, and economic cooperation in the region. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan arrived in Kuwait on Tuesday as the first stop of his Gulf tour. The visit comes amid ongoing regional tensions, with Ankara seeking to strengthen diplomatic, economic, and security ties with Gulf nations. Erdoğan met with Kuwaiti leaders to review bilateral relations and explore ways to expand cooperation in trade, energy, defense, and infrastructure. Discussions also touched on regional developments, including ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and efforts to promote stability and peace. Erdoğan's Gulf tour underscores Ankara's growing role as a mediator and strategic partner in the region, balancing relations among key Gulf states while promoting regional security and economic collaboration. The Türkiye Gulf Cooperation Council dialogue has gained momentum, with efforts to expand trade, investment, and energy cooperation. Ankara has been particularly active in advancing defense and infrastructure collaborations with Gulf states, reinforcing mutual interests beyond political and security concerns. As Türkiye continues to assert itself as a regional mediator, analysts view its diplomatic push as a strategic effort to balance relations among Gulf nations while also maintaining its broader geopolitical stance. With ongoing instability in the Middle East, Türkiye's role in the Gulf is expected to be pivotal in shaping future regional dynamics.
Let's start with Anews editor Mustafa Kocakenar. Thank you for coming here to our studio.
Thank you, Jamila.
Now, can you explain the objectives and expected outcomes of President Erdogan's Gulf tour, starting with Kuwait?
Jamila, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan this week embarked on a Gulf tour with the aim of strengthening Turkey's bilateral or multilateral cooperation with the countries in the region. And within this context, yesterday President Erdoğan arrived in Kuwait, and today he is visiting Qatar, and tomorrow he is set to visit Oman. It is clearly showing that Turkey is striving for deepening of cooperation between Turkey and Gulf countries, and we know that the delicate balance in the occupied Palestinian territory, Gaza Strip, and fragile U.S.-sponsored Gaza ceasefire is on the table at the meeting between Turkish and Arab decision makers. President Erdoğan in Kuwait yesterday reiterated Turkey's strong support for the implementation of the Trump-sponsored Gaza peace deal, and he is always calling for unity and solidarity in terms of dealing with the security issues posed by the Israeli decision makers. On the other hand, Gulf countries are also praising Turkey's diplomatic efforts in advancing peace and a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, and it is clearly showing that Turkey is taking its own steps to ensure peace and long-standing peace and stability in the Middle East. I hope that all regional stakeholders will be able to take Turkey's security demands into the consideration if they want to see peace and tranquility in the region. Turkey has been always calling for regional solutions for regional problems. Within this context, Turkey is expecting some concrete steps from regional countries in terms of rebuilding and reconstructing the war-torn Gaza Strip. I hope that Erdogan's latest visit to Gulf countries will yield positive results in terms of deepening bilateral or multilateral cooperation between Turkey and these countries.
Joining us live in the studio is also Professor of Strategic Studies at Istanbul Aydın University, Dr. Nurhan Albaya. In what ways has Turkey supported the U.S. brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and what challenges remain?
The crucial role of Turkey in this ceasefire and in general in the Middle East conflict is showing very clearly and very strongly. But if we're going to talk about the ceasefire agreement in Gaza or between Hamas and Israel, it has been shown very clearly after the explosion or after Doha attack. After Doha attack last September, Doha started threatening the international community that they might withdraw from their main role, which is being a mediator between Hamas and Israel. After that, the General Assembly, the 80th General Assembly of United Nations has been held in New York, and President Erdogan met with President Trump, and here President Trump is already considering President Erdogan and Turkey in general as the most strong or the strongest power in the Middle East, and they are responsible for stabilize the region. And this crucial role started last December 2024, after Assad regime has been failed in Syria. And President Trump already gave this credit to President Erdogan, and he said this clearly in their press meeting live in front of everyone, that all credits should go to President Erdogan. And we can see the effort from President Erdogan and the Turkish administration in general in stabilize Syria and the ongoing reconstruction and the ongoing support Syria to ensure stability in this country. So that's why they are considering, the international community now, their eyes on Turkey as the strongest power in a very important region. Lots of conflicts in this region, which is Middle East, and Turkey is responsible to stabilize and to work towards more stability, of course, side by side with other powers or other members in the international community, for example, United States of America and other European countries. That's why President Erdogan and Turkey were on the table as main player and main mediator in a ceasefire agreement or peace agreement, as they are calling, between Hamas and Israel. It's not only about that. Now, Turkey, the role of Turkey didn't finish. They are still continuing in ensuring that both sides, Hamas and Israel, will stick to the terms of peace agreement and ceasefire agreement. We saw what happened last Sunday. 95 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed in only one day in Khan Yunis, particularly as a result of continuous attack by Israel. In this case, it means that Israel broke the ceasefire. It means that Israel is not committed with the terms of ceasefire agreement. So in this case, Turkey, as the main player in this ceasefire agreement, they should ensure that both sides are committed to the terms. It's not only about that. We can see clearly that Turkish Red Crescent and the Humanitarian Aid Association of Turkey started to enter Gaza. Their presence is already there, and we heard some talks about presence of Turkish forces in Gaza to supervise and to ensure that the process and the progress of this ceasefire is continuing and is happening in the right direction.
And Mustafa, can you explain how Turkey's diplomatic engagement in Gaza ties into its broader Middle East strategy?
Jamila, actually, as I said, Turkey is calling for regional solutions for regional problems. And within this context, since the very beginning of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, Turkey has been trying to increase international awareness about the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. And I think that Turkey's diplomatic initiatives paved the way for the broader recognition of Palestinian state by the international community. As you know, Turkey has been always advocating for an independent and territorially integrated Palestinian state based on 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. And on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in September, many Western countries, France in particular, recognized Palestine as a state. And it is clearly showing that Turkey's actions are yielding positive results in terms of bringing long-standing peace and stability to the Middle East. But on the other hand, I think that we shouldn't forget that Israel committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. Israel committed genocide against innocent Palestinians living in the occupied Palestinian territory, Gaza Strip. And right now there is still ongoing genocide case against Israel at the International Criminal Court. Turkey is one of the most important supporters of this genocide case against Israel. And yes, there is a delicate balance in the Gaza Strip right now, and a fragile ceasefire is still holding. But Turkish decision makers have been always warning against Israeli provocations and Israeli violations, because Turkish decision makers are very, very aware of the fact that Israel can violate ceasefire at any time. And Turkey knows that Israel is pursuing expansionist geopolitical agenda in the Middle East, because on the ground we see that Israel is not only targeting Palestinian people living in both Gaza Strip and West Bank, they are also targeting other countries' political sovereignty and territorial integrity. In this process, Israel targeted Lebanon, Yemen, Iran, and recently Qatar. And it is clearly showing that Israel is pursuing expansionist geopolitical agenda in the Middle East. And we can clearly understand this strategy from the statements coming from Israeli decision makers, because far-right ministers within Benjamin Netanyahu's war cabinets are still pushing for expanded military operations across the region. They said that yes, we took back hostages, and right now we can continue our military operations in the occupied Palestinian territory, Gaza Strip. And it is evident that Israel can violate a U.S.-sponsored Gaza deal at any time. But I think that right now Gaza ceasefire deal is too big to fail for Trump. Trump's personal involvement in this process, I think, requires Israeli attention, because if Israel violates a ceasefire deal, it will be Trump's responsibility to keep the fragile peace in the region alive. Within this context, Turkey has been expecting some concrete steps from the United States to pressure Israel to deal with the security issues in the region. Within this context, American decision makers this week are coming to Israel to discuss the possible steps in terms of dealing with the security problems in the region. I hope that regional countries will be able to unite against Israel, and they will keep the ceasefire alive in the region.
And Dr. Nurhan, what lessons can other regional actors learn from Turkey's approach to multilateral diplomacy and conflict resolution?
Turkey, after successfully proving itself as the strongest power in the Middle East region, here I have to highlight the efforts of President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. For example, the latest example, actually, the tour of President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, Gulf tour from Kuwait to now Qatar, and tomorrow Oman. Basically, today there will be a very important session, the 11th session of the Supreme Joint Cooperation Committee, which this was a milestone between Qatar and Turkey. It has been established in 2014 in a yearly basis. This committee it's been held. So this is so important because this Supreme Joint Cooperation Committee allowed both countries to sign lots of agreements, more than 90 agreements so far since 2014, Jamila, they signed. And those agreements related to so many fields: trade, education, digital economy, security, military, and of course investments. Also, Qatar, which is one of the largest investors in Turkey in terms of capital, especially in real estate and military for military purposes. So far, Qatar investments $20 billion in Turkey. So it was a milestone. This is just example between Turkey and one member of the international community. So now Turkey, following the approach of stability towards more stability Middle East region. Not only in this, the role of Turkey in Syria as well, before Assad regime, or during, Assad regime, and after the failure of Assad regime and the current president Ahmed al-Shara, and the continuous support and ensuring the reconstruction of Syria and new Syria to be involved in the international community. We all know that since 2011, Syria was isolated totally from the international community. So that support to get Syria back into the international community, the reconstruction which is happening already now in Syria. We are talking about after 13 years of war in Syria. It wasn't easy at all. Also, Gaza, we cannot forget. Since the beginning, the position and the situation of Turkey was so clear to everyone. Turkey was supporting Gaza people since October 7th. And Turkey was the only country in the region that took strong decisions. They already cut the trade between Turkey and Israel. It was the only member in the international community and the only member in the Middle East region to do so. Other countries, especially we are talking about Arab countries, they didn't stop trade. They didn't stop any, let's call it a peace agreement. Everything was very normal compared to before October 7th. So Turkey, when they decided to cut the relationship, the trade relationship or commercial relationship between Israel and Turkey, which cost Turkey so much, but despite this, and to stand and to support Palestine and people in Gaza, they took this decision. So it was very remarkable. In United Nations General Assembly, same. That's why we saw President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan side by side on the head of the table with President Erdoğan as the strongest player in the Middle East, and it means that the responsibility on Turkey will be huge to stabilize and to work towards more stability in Middle East. That's why Turkey now, they are working in the right track towards more stability Middle East, and they are following the approach of foreign Turkish diplomacy in a very, very successful way.
And Mustafa, how do personal relationships such as that between Erdoğan and global leaders like Trump impact Turkey's diplomatic effectiveness?
Cemile, we know that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and his American counterpart Donald Trump have been enjoying close relationships in all fields. They are regularly praising each other's leadership style to cope with the international security challenges. And Donald Trump is always calling Erdoğan as a tough leader and strong negotiators. And it is clearly showing that Turkey and the United States are cooperating on the Gaza ceasefire deal. And on the sidelines of the UNGA, President Erdoğan joined Trump and other Muslim leaders to discuss the possible steps with the aim of halting Israel's military campaign in the Gaza Strip. And after this meeting, President Erdoğan also went to the Washington, D.C. to meet with Trump at the White House, and Turkish and the American decision makers exchange views on the joint steps to ensure ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And following his meetings with Erdoğan, Trump announced his 20 points Gaza peace deal, and it is clearly showing that Turkey's diplomatic actions paved the way for a recent ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. And yes, last week Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan also went to Egypt to participate in the historic Gaza Peace Summit. Many leaders were in this summit, and President Erdoğan met with all of them to discuss the possible steps to rebuild and reconstruct the war-torn Gaza Strip. At this meeting, Trump again hailed President Erdoğan's personal role in advancing Gaza ceasefire deal, and it is clearly showing that the United States is considering Turkey as a reliable partner in keeping a ceasefire deal alive in the region. And Turkish decision makers reiterate at every opportunity that Turkey is ready to do whatever is necessary to rebuild and reconstruct the war-torn Gaza Strip. I think that Turkey and the United States will continue to cooperate on these matters. Last week, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan held a phone conversation with his American counterpart Marco Rubio to discuss the latest developments about peace and stability in the Middle East. Maybe in the foreseeable future, President Erdoğan will hold a phone conversation with his American counterpart Donald Trump. I think that Turkey's diplomatic initiatives are crucial to keep the ceasefire deal alive. That is the reason why President Erdoğan is visiting Gulf countries right now, because Qatar is one of the most important mediators in a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. And Turkey has been also enjoying close relationships with Qatar in many fields, ranging from military and trade to politics and economy. I hope that strengthening of cooperation between Turkey and Qatar will yield positive results in terms of upholding the Palestinian rights.
Now we'll continue with our questions, but let's take a look at this report. Turkey's proactive diplomacy has positioned it as a key global mediator, reshaping conflict zones through dialogue, peace efforts, and regional cooperation.
Dünyanın içinden geçtiği fırtınalı dönemde Türkiye liyakatli kadroların riyasetindedir. Emin ve ehil ellerde güvendedir.
Türkiye has increasingly positioned itself as a pivotal actor in resolving major regional conflicts, leveraging its strategic location and diplomatic expertise to promote peace and stability. From the ongoing crisis in Gaza, where Türkiye has actively engaged in mediation efforts to curb Israeli violence and support ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas, to the long-running civil war in Syria, Ankara has consistently advocated for negotiated solutions and humanitarian relief.
On this extraordinary occasion, I also want to give our sincere thanks to President Erdoğan of Turkey. He's always there when I need him. He's such a tough guy. He is tough as you can be, but we love him. And when they have a problem with you, they always call me to handle it. And usually I come through. We just have a good relationship, and we have from the beginning. And so I want to thank you very much and say hello to your wife, your beautiful wife. And it's great to be with you. Always there. When I need him, he's always there. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
In South and Central Asia, Türkiye has played a constructive role in reducing tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan, as well as between Pakistan and India, encouraging dialogue and cooperation to prevent escalations that could destabilize the broader region.
Your political struggle, spanning over several decades, has transformed Türkiye into a robust and a very strong economy, a progressive society, and a nation of enormous diplomatic influence on the global stage.
Meanwhile, in the Horn of Africa, Ankara has offered diplomatic channels to ease the Ethiopia-Somalia dispute, facilitating communication between conflicting parties to avert wider conflict.
Afrika Birliği'nin barış çabalarına en güçlü desteği veren ülkelerden biriyiz. Ankara süreci kapsamında Somali ile Etiyopya arasındaki anlaşmazlığın çözümüne yönelik arabuluculuk rolümüz bu çabaların bir örneğidir.
Türkiye played a key role in supporting Azerbaijan's liberation of Karabakh from Armenian control and helped pave the way for lasting peace and reconciliation between the two nations in the region.
Libya'dan Karabağ, nerede bize ihtiyaç varsa orada yine biz bunu yaptık.
Ankara employs a combination of political, economic, and humanitarian initiatives, emphasizing dialogue, local ownership of solutions, and multilateral cooperation. These efforts reflect Türkiye's growing role as a bridge builder in international diplomacy, with its foreign policy increasingly recognized for advancing peace, security, and regional development amid complex global challenges.
Erdoğan he's respected by Russia. Ukraine I can't tell you about, but he is respected by Putin. And he's a friend of mine, you can see. Why? I get along with the tough ones. I don't get along with the weak ones. I get along with the tough ones. I don't know what that is, but Erdoğan's been great with me. When NATO has a problem with Erdoğan, which they often do, they call me to talk to him. And I've never failed in working it out like immediately. Is that right?
Balkanlardan Kafkasya'ya, Afrika'dan Orta Asya'ya, bu coğrafyada sulh-ü sükûnun hakim olması için mücadelemizi sürdüreceğiz.
And we're back. You're watching Turkey's diplomacy. Now let's continue with Dr. Nurhan. In your view, what role can Turkey and other regional actors play in preventing future escalations in Gaza?
They have to make sure that both sides of this, unfortunately, I have to say it, fragile agreement, they have to make sure that both sides, they are committed to this ceasefire agreement or to the terms of this agreement. It's so clearly and it's so obvious that we are suffering from lack of supervision. On both sides, on Hamas and Israel. Especially, we are talking here about Israel, and if we decided to look at the historical record of Israel in terms of committed to a certain ceasefire or committed to a previous ceasefire, they failed to do so. They never committed to any ceasefire terms. We can see this clearly in Lebanon. They already signed last February ceasefire agreement after 4 months of intensive war, intensive bombs all around Lebanon, not only south. Lots of people have been killed, but till now, on a daily basis, Israel is still bombing Lebanon, particularly the south of Lebanon. So now, if we're gonna just have a look on Gaza, same exactly what's happening. Last Sunday, 95 only in Khan Yunis. So we are facing lack of supervision. mediators should make sure that both sides are committed to the terms of ceasefire. Till now, we didn't see strong strong presence of some of those key players or mediators. For example, here especially I'm talking about Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar. They're supposed to send some military forces to supervise the process or the progress of this fragile ceasefire, but still we didn't see anything on the floor. Also, to make sure that the humanitarian aid is in a regular basis and as per the peace agreement, which allows 400 trucks to enter in a daily basis to Gaza, but as per the news, less than 400, sometimes 200 trucks entering to Gaza only, this is another way of, or another point has been broken in this ceasefire agreement or peace agreement. So again, we have lack of implementation, and this as a result of lack of supervision from the mediators and from United Nations and from US as well, US administration, because this will be like a failure of Trump's administration. Okay, you put this fire on the table, ceasefire agreement, true, but what about the implementation? If we have a good plan, a good peace plan, a good ceasefire plan, perfect one, but without good implementation, I think, will be useless in this case. So this is briefly the case of Gaza, which we have to improve the supervision and the implementation of this ceasefire agreement.
And Mustafa, can Ankara play a role in post-conflict reconstruction and rehabilitation in Gaza?
Cemile, it is crystal clear that Turkey can take responsibility in post-conflict reconstruction and rehabilitation in Gaza. And Turkish Red Crescent and Turkish Disaster Management Authority have been already in discussions to do whatever is necessary to rebuild and reconstruct the war-torn Gaza Strip. Turkey also sent another humanitarian aid ship to Egypt to mitigate the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. But it is up to Israel right now to deal with the security challenges in the region. Israel is still not opening Rafah border crossings, and humanitarian aid trucks are still waiting for Israeli approval for the opening of the Rafah border crossing. On the other hand, there are still some discussions about a political future of Gaza. Actually, within Trump's sponsored Gaza deal, there are many uncertainties about Hamas disarmament and who will govern the Gaza Strip. U.S. President Donald Trump claimed that there will be a transitional and technocratic government to govern Gaza, and Trump and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair are set to lead this transitional government. But on the ground, we know that Tony Blair has very bad reputation among Middle Eastern countries and Middle Eastern people, because in 2003, as British Prime Minister, Tony Blair supported United States military aggression against Iraq. That is the reason why right now no one is ailing Tony Blair's role for Gaza's future. And Turkish decision makers reiterated every opportunity that Turkey will take responsibility in terms of revitalizing the war-torn Gaza Strip. On the other hand, Turkish National Defense Minister Yaşar Güler also said that Turkish military forces will be ready to take responsibility to keep peace between Israel and Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. But we know that Israel is strictly against any possible Turkish role in future of Gaza, because I think Turkey's rising geopolitical influence in the Middle East is pushing Israel's buttons. That is the reason why Israel's embattled Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is always urging the United States to take steps against Turkey's geopolitical political influence in the region. But on the contrary to expectations of Netanyahu, Trump publicly sided with Turkey and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, and Trump urged Netanyahu to be reasonable if Israel wants to deal with its bilateral or multilateral security problems with Turkey. Yes, Turkey can take responsibility to rebuild and reconstruct the Gaza Strip. Turkey is always calling upon wealthy Gulf countries to take further responsibility to revitalize the war-torn Gaza Strip. I think that Turkey will continue to cooperate with wealthy nations in the Middle East on these matters. I think that Turkey is also expecting some concrete steps from Western countries to bring peace and stability to the region. I think that Turkey can take any responsibility to keep peace in the Middle East, but as I said, it is up to Israel to accept Turkey's role in the Gaza Strip. But on the ground right now, Israeli decision makers are strictly against Turkish role in Gaza's future. They are also against Qatari role in Gaza's future, but I think that no one can bring peace and stability to the Middle East except Turkey and Qatar, because Hamas is relying on Turkish and Qatari role with the aim of implementing Trump-sponsored Gaza peace deal. That is the reason why Middle East will need Turkey's important role if the countries want to see long-standing tranquility in the region.
And Dr. Nurhan, how has Turkey's diplomacy affected global perceptions of the Gaza conflict?
It's affected so much since the beginning, and since the clear vision of President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, since the beginning in all his speeches, the way he was talking, even the way he was taking decisions, even the body language, his body language while he was talking about Palestine and the conflict in Gaza, all those combined together were giving us the message from or by his side, from his side to the audience, to us, as he was clear, straightforward, that we are totally against Israel. We will stand forever with our people in Gaza, and even clearly he described and expressed and explained his position towards Hamas as those, or this group is not a terrorist group, they are resistant group. So he was clear since the beginning, till he became, or till Turkey actually became a main player and mediator in this ceasefire. It's not only in Gaza, Jamila. Earlier this month, we saw the conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And Turkey, along with Qatar, they became mediators in this conflict. Also, we cannot deny the role and the crucial role of Turkey in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So it's not only about Gaza or Middle East. No, the crucial role of Turkey's diplomacy, it's all around the world. So, and it's so important, and this proof to the whole international community that Turkey is so strong player in the international community, or strong member in the international community. Here again, just the conflict in Gaza, which the ceasefire agreement gave us very small hope that the situation in Gaza will change in the upcoming days or in the upcoming period of time. But we need, and the mediators should put more effort in terms of the implementation and the execution of this plan. We still have, or we are optimistic actually, especially from Turkey's administration. We are waiting more from Turkey in terms of Gaza, or when we are talking about Gaza, when we saw a couple of days ago Turkish Red Crescent on the floor in Gaza, along with the Humanitarian Relief Association, Turkish Humanitarian Relief Association, we saw them organizing the access of the humanitarian aid from Rafah Gate to Gaza, and ensuring that those humanitarian aids will reach and will arrive to everyone in Gaza. But unfortunately, Israel doesn't want ceasefire. We have all to understand this. Israel doesn't want ceasefire. Israel doesn't want for humanitarian aid to be entered or to be reached to people in Gaza. That's why Israel is rejecting everything, is rejecting anything will achieve or will reach us and the whole international communication to peace or stability in Gaza and in general in the Middle East.
So, Professor of Strategic Studies at Istanbul Aydın University, Dr. Nurhan Albaya, thank you for joining Turkey's Diplomacy. Anews editor Mustafa Kocakenar, thank you for joining Anews.
Thank you, Cemile.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.